Always good to talk to Matt Canavan, the Queensland Senator, Nationals to his bootstraps, and he's got a new target when it comes to net zero, as well as the wonderful Darren Barnett, brother from another mother, normally about Australian issues, and we will get to those in a moment or two's time, but how can we not talk about the national and international things that are happening right now, including the Prime Minister and how he's played things here. Look, freshly re-elected, 90-something seats, biggest possible mandate. No one is suggesting there's been some huge change in Australia's opinion about him and his leadership. But I've got to say, Matt, I find it extraordinary that, for want of a better term, the Trump derangement syndrome is so deep in and around the people who may well talk to the Prime Minister or the Prime Minister himself, that they couldn't just quickly, Sunday afternoon say, yep, job well done. No, we had to convene a meeting hours after the thing had taken place, and we didn't hear from them until a day after we knew that this had taken place. And then they quickly went back to de-escalation. What did you think of the Prime Minister and Penny Wong today?
Paul, I just wish I could play poker against the PM. He doesn't have the greatest poker face, even after coming out a day later. He clearly wears his reluctance on his face. He's had to, I suppose, he's been told, I presume, behind closed doors that, mate, you better get out there and say you support our greatest ally because there's a lot on the line for our country if you don't. But he seems to be a reluctant supporter of the United States, and I think that's a very dangerous thing for our country. We've seen the Prime Minister spend more time on the China relationship, really, in his first term than he did on the American relationship. And now, 6 months after Donald Trump was elected, we still haven't had a meeting between the Australian Prime Minister and Donald Trump. Of course, last week when the meeting fell over, it wasn't all the Prime Minister's fault, given the circumstances, but it is the Prime Minister's fault that he hasn't tried to go to Washington DC earlier. It's been 6 months since the election, and you've seen a cavalcade of Prime Ministers from other Five Eyes countries go there and have that personal relationship with the President. And unfortunately for our country, we don't. And we'll probably get on to the implications of this particular strike and what's going on in the Middle East. But I think one thing that hasn't been remarked enough in our own media is the risk to our own country of all of this. Because if there is a greater distraction of the United States in the Middle East, they've already moved a carrier strike group from the Pacific to the Middle East. What does that mean for security in our region? We haven't got a government that's really taken a strong focus on our own defence in their first term. Yeah,
there's also, while the world's attention is focused on this part of the globe, being the Middle East, we know that obviously other issues inside the Middle East, obviously what's happening in Ukraine, obviously what may well be happening when it comes to further militarisation of China, all of that can be happening while we're focusing on one part of the world at once. Darren, again, I'd imagine the benefit of the doubt to the Prime Minister is, no, he wasn't told. Why? Because we know that the Democrats weren't even told in the Senate. We were told that basically need to know, and obviously the Australian Prime Minister, perhaps not on need to know, but for some reason, Prime Minister either couldn't or wouldn't say that today after a meeting after, again, an urgent meeting after something had happened. It's all a bit odd, isn't it?
Yeah, but if you're the Prime Minister, you don't want the story to be Australia not told. So that ambiguity of language was not surprising, but they probably should have got their act together a little bit sooner. I think they should have probably met. National Security Committee should have met yesterday, not today. But in the end, this war is going to go for quite some time, we think. So I think we'll forget about what happened on day one. It's more about what happens on day 31 and day 61. And let's hope that wiser, cooler heads prevail. But at this point in time, we don't know what escalation might look like. But one thing that probably will happen, there'll be a strangle on oil supplies, and that does impact China. So I think China takes an enormous percentage of its oil from Iran. So Straits of Hormuz, I think that's going to be the choke point, and that's going to be really the catalyst for what happens in the next section of this conflict. What does Iran decide to do, and what happens as a result?
Look, I've got to say, and perhaps it's ourselves included, but I've got to say I've sort of found it odd that one of the people who had public utterances today about the consequences of what's happening on the other side of the world was, among others, the NRMA, that was out there telling everyone to fill up your tank today because who knows what's happened in a couple of days' time. That's where I'm probably going to draw the line in terms of the latest and breaking of information here. But there is something that, say, back to that Jeffrey Robertson thing, right? And okay, I get provocateur, left-wing lawyer, but we see in parts of mainly the left of the United States suggesting, oh, this is illegal, he could be impeached for this. And again, perhaps that delay that comes out of places like Australia. I get it, Matt. While you and I might be fluent in MAGA, you and I may exchange the odd text message about something that has happened deep inside the MAGAverse at time to time, but I also know that the majority of the Australian people does not have the same view that we have about Donald Trump. But that said, how is it so deep for so many that they're unable to divorce, every and any action of Donald Trump's is disastrous with, you mean the country that's threatening terrorist attacks has been put on its arse? Great.
Well, Paul, even taking away the particular circumstances of this horrific Iranian regime, just a couple of presidents ago in Barack Obama, I believe he and his administration bombed 7 countries. 7 countries. And there was no congressional approval. The circumstances around those bombings were very similar to these that the world found out after the event for obvious reasons. And the president didn't go and seek congressional approval. I mean, this is not a new thing, and I'll leave it to other legal experts about whether or not under the US Constitution the president should seek congressional approval. But clearly Donald Trump's done nothing different than a cavalcade of presidents before him. They weren't impeached. I don't think he will successfully be impeached here either. And then you get on to the particulars of this Iranian regime. Clearly there is a need to try to prevent Iran from seeking or having the most terrible of weapons, given their sponsorship of horrific terrorist acts in the region. So it is worth trying to do this. Now, I'm not exactly sure whether this has or we can succeed. I think that's still an open question, but I do think the US administration deserves marks for trying, and now we've got to try and ensure that this doesn't blow out to a wider war as well.
All right, Darren, one last thought on this.
Of all the things that Trump would be impeached for, it ain't going to be this one.
Please. And again, remember to actually be removed. I mean, this is the whole stupidity of the impeachment process. It's 2/3 of the Senate. As long as they got half or a little over or a little under, it's never... No Team Red, Team Blue is going to be booted out of office unless it is something unimaginably horrific, which I don't imagine is coming anytime soon. All right, I want to squeeze in a couple of Australian issues here, as well as keeping our eye on everything happening around the world. Matt, you have been given the responsibility from the Nats of actually putting a dollar value on net zero. Now, you've spoken about it a long time. You've waited for this number to come from other people, but it's your job now. How many bits of butcher's paper do you have, and how will you work it out?
Well, I won't be doing the work myself, Paul, but we'll be seeking to try and get to the bottom of it with the help of smarter people than me. It's really is a travesty that we haven't done this work. We've approached this net zero issue with a shoot first, ask questions later approach, and that has been as disastrous as normally such an approach is. By doing this, we have shot a number of industries already. We've lost our nickel industry, we've lost our urea industry, it's the most important fertiliser, and we've lost our plastics industry. Just in the first 3 years of net zero, there's been over 10,000 jobs lost across those 3 industries, and they're essential ones, were essential ones to our economy. And so given these geopolitical risks that we've already highlighted, why are we deindustrialising our nation when the rest of the world is not? So in particular, we should be costing a scenario where if we continue to act like we've got our head in the sand about what's going on everywhere else in the world, how much would that cost our country? How much would that cost in terms of jobs, in terms of higher power prices, and of course in terms of lost industries that are essential to the defence of this nation? So look, we'll be trying to do that work. I welcome the fact that our leader, David Littleproud, has said we will review our position on net zero emissions, and it can't come soon enough.
Darren, as a person who's well and truly across the parts of the country that believe there is no price that is higher to pay than the potential issues to do with the planet, and Australia must get rid of 110% of 1% of the world's problems. Would you like to suggest Matt should look under particular rocks about where that dollar value could be?
What I've said before, and I'll say it again very happily, the Nationals, particularly people like Senator Canavan, Barnaby Joyce, have done a very good job of convincing regional Australia that renewables is not in their best interests. Therefore, it's very difficult for the Nationals to reverse from that position and reverse from a pro-nuclear stance. So, we don't want to preempt what the report or the inquiry will find, but I wouldn't be surprised if it goes status quo. The problem is, politically, if you're in a coalition, that places enormous pressure back on those city seats that the Liberals need to win in order for the coalition to return to power. And that's going to be an internal dogfight that I think is going to be a very difficult one.
Well, also, I was noticing that Susan Lee, who is going to be giving an address to the press club in the next couple of days, already the net zero issue is one that is being demanded to be answered in the early days of a new parliamentary term. One would imagine it is not going to be resolved anytime soon, but certainly I think that, if Matt's got the information and you can put the information together, we keep being told that information is what's able to form opinions. What's wrong with having, as you say, Matt, the information that has either been long denied or is in a million different places?
Well, just to take up Darren's point, what I'd like to see is that we come to a decision after all of this, making our choice based on what's best for our country, not what's best for winning particular seats. And I agree with what John Howard said. The best politics is usually the best policy. So let's focus on that.
All right, good stuff, lads. I do appreciate it. Thank you, Darren. Thank you, Matt. We'll see you again into the future.